Huh. Would you look at that? The kid's dead. You turn around to ask the rabbit why the kid is dead. He makes you into another dead kid. That's an actual passage from Return to the Pit, and it doesn't end there. This book is really weird. Like weirder than Fazbear Fright's levels of weird. I know, I wish I was joking. A few months back, we got the release of the first ever full-length Five Nights At Freddy's interactive novel the week before. And needless to say, everyone liked that book. It's still considered one of the best FNAF books by most, and it deserves that spot. But on Christmas Eve, the brand new second interactive novel was released. Return to the Pit. The book was released early in most stores, as is the norm of FNAF books, which means that even before it actually released, people were debating its lore and wondering what the hell Scott Cawthon was smoking when he co-wrote this book. I do want to point out that since this book is co-written with another author, I don't want to hate on her at all. I've heard she has good books aside from this one, even though I've never read any. But wow, is this book ridiculous in terms of the actual lore and even its basic gameplay. Functioning time travel, the MCI surviving, Oswald creating a group of bounty hunters to kill the Yellow Rabbit, William Afton going to jail, Oswald getting hit by a car 5 times, the Yellow Rabbit exploding. This book has it all. Okay, what actually happens in Return to the Pit? Why do I seem to dislike this book so much? And most importantly of all, why do I think this book isn't canon to the main timeline? Let's get right into it. I'm Withered Circle, and today, we're going to be diving into the book that breaks the first and most important rule of Five Nights at Freddy's. Here we go. Return to the Pit is an interactive retelling of the Into the Pit story. This retelling seems to be based more on the novella from Fazbear Frights than the Into the Pit game itself, since the Five Nights system from the game doesn't exist in this novel, along with a lot of other differences that set it apart from that adaptation. Yet again, as always, you play as Oswald, a lonely 6th grader who has nothing to do on his summer vacation, and ends up going to a ball pit at Jeff's Pizza, which somehow time travels him to the year 1985, where he meets some friends, Chip and Mike, and witnesses a weird, twisted version of the missing children incident, where 5 kids got kidnapped and killed by William Afton at a Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The other Into the Pit retellings make it pretty clear that what we see here isn't actually time travel, but rather a hallucination or dream Oswald is having due to the soul energy surrounding the ball pit. But Return to the Pit chucks all that out the window because the book uses the word time travel every other sentence. Not only that, but a lot of its endings directly reference Oswald time traveling to the past. Since this is a choose your own adventure, the book has several routes to follow, but the 3 main ones story-wise are 1. Oswald plays through a version of events very similar to the Into the Pit novella, and he's reunited with his dad. 2. Oswald joins a group of adults, including Chip, who actually exists, is 40 plus years old, and is completely okay with time travel because he's seen it happen before, team up Avengers style, and beat up the Yellow Rabbit. They fail miserably. 3. Oswald gets the secret ending where he jumps into an arcade machine, saves an 8-bit version of the MCI, which makes the Yellow Rabbit explode, resulting in Oswald being sent back to the future and Jeff's becoming a successful location, along with Oswald finding an old newspaper of the Yellow Rabbit going to jail in handcuffs. Do you see what I mean when I say this book is weird? And yet, even though this book has weird narrative choices, that's not the reason I'm declaring it non-canon to the games, because I think there's a very specific reason why Return to the Pit was written the way it was, and these weird details are pointing us to a conclusion we should have come to ages ago. So what makes me think this book is not in the game's timeline? Well, to put it simply, Return to the Pit is just filled with so many weird contradictions and overall sloppy writing that I just can't fathom how Scott Cawthon looked at this and went, yeah, okay, that looks good, if there wasn't something else to it. There's a literal entire page where Oswald goes to have lunch with his mom and the Yellow Rabbit, but he's wearing a pair of bunny ears, which results in the whole page talking about how he feels, quote, very good, very bunny, before becoming one with being a bunny and joining the bunny family. Because here's the thing, even though you might write off this book's weird endings as the writers being silly, if these are endings we can achieve without cheating, that means they're all things that could happen in the story. I want to make it clear that while I think it's non-canon, we can still use its lore reveals in the actual continuity as they're still worth taking into consideration. So before we tackle the big continuity debate surrounding this interactive novel, let's discuss its lore. Well, first of all, we now know, thanks to the Avengers route, that Chip and Mike are real people, which I always assumed to be the case. We saved them in the Into the Pit game, and it makes sense for them to escape and grow up to become adults in the real world. What I don't like is how Chip somehow remembers that Oswald time traveled into the past, and the fact that other kids in his time went into that same ball pit and got sent even further back in time. This is absolutely not what the ball pit does. It's tied to one specific day, one specific memory, the missing children incident. It takes the fear and agony that the children felt that day and turns it into a weird, twisted nightmare, just like what we see of the posters in FNAF 1. The building is haunted, which makes it shift and change, and this ball pit is the same. It's not actually time travel. No one should remember Oswald, and Oswald shouldn't be able to alter events in the past and see their effects in the future. Or should he? Remember the ending I brought up where Oswald saves the MCI and this results in his present being changed? What if I told you that in this secret ending, Oswald is still stuck in the pit? In fact, this entire book and its events are all Oswald hallucinating inside that old ball pit. You might think this is insane, but other theorists have talked about this in the past, and so have other pieces of Into the Pit media. In fact, it's likely that every single retelling of Into the Pit we've seen thus far, Oswald reliving the same nightmare over and over again while he's stuck in the ball pit. There are 3 total retellings of the story: the original Into the Pit novella from Frights, the Into the Pit game, and Return to the Pit. You could argue that a graphic novel is a retelling, but I'll leave it out for simplicity's sake. Anyway, what if the reason the story is being retold to us so many times is because Oswald is reliving it over and over again? Ball pit makes Oswald hallucinate things into reality, as he somehow somehow manages to bring a rat from the past into the future, or a key from the future into the past. All of this stuff feels very real and visceral to Oswald, but obviously it's just a haunted ball pit making him see things. This is similar to FNAF 3, where we can somehow press the wall tiles in specific combinations to be teleported into a minigame. That feels real and we can do it, but the only reason it's happening is because Fazbear's Fright is haunted and is making the night guard hallucinate. But I digress. Into the Pit being a constant looping nightmare for Oswald not only matches Scott Cawthon's sadistic writing style, but it also explains why we see the story retold to us so many times. Fear's Glitch Society has a very good video on loop theory, as this idea is called, so I highly suggest you check it out. As well as that, the secret ending where you save the MCI goes directly against the main moral of the FNAF story. Five Nights at Freddy's is all about your inability to change the past. No matter how hard you try, you can't save the MCI kids. You can't stop William Afton from doing the horrible things he did, and you can't prevent the loss of so many things to so many different people. What you can do is change the present and future, and try to make things right. It's a great moral that I believe Scott has a very strong belief in, so seeing him go against this decade-old motif in an interactive novel is really weird. It's not something that he'd normally do. So maybe, unlike VIP and the week before, this book was never meant to be in the games. It never tells us it happens in the games as the week before does, but is there anything else we can learn from Return to the Pit? Yes there is, because this book directly tells us that there were only 5 dead kids in the missing children incident. But wasn't this already obvious? No, it wasn't. Let me explain. In Return to the Pit, after witnessing the yellow rabbit kill the missing children incident victims, Oswald remembers seeing the kids dead on the floor. He recalls 5 dead bodies. In both the novella and the game, Oswald sees 6 bodies. In the game's Collect the Hats minigame, we collect 6 birthday hats representing the 6 MCI kids: Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, Cassidy, and the elusive 6th victim, Andrew, the one William Afton shouldn't have killed. So why are there suddenly only 5 kids in this story? Well, there's 3 options. Option 1. This is further evidence to suggest Return to the Pit doesn't belong in the main timeline, as it contradicts previous retellings of Into the Pit. Option 2. This is a retcon. Option 3. We can't trust what Oswald sees. In the Into the Pit game, the 6th victim is obscured from sight, hidden in the shadows of the party room, so it's totally possible that Oswald didn't see the 6th kid in Return to the Pit. But as I brought up earlier, this book is closer to the novella, where Oswald definitely sees 6 kids. So what can we derive from this? While some people were quick to say this meant Andrew doesn't exist and that Cassie's the vengeful spirit, I disagree. Either this is proof that the Return to the Pit can't be the main version of the story, like I said, or this means Andrew was meant to die somewhere else. But there's more lore reveals. Right after the MCI scene, you're given the options to either run straight to the ball pit, slow down once you're back in the restaurant, or run for the exit. If you go for one of the first two, you reach the ball pit safely, but if you run for the exit, you hear a young girl's voice calling for help. As you approach the voice, you find, and I quote, a toy doll that resembles a little girl. She has red hair and pigtails and is wearing a red dress to match her hair. Her face, legs, and arms are bone white, and she has a blood red nose and crimson circles on her cheeks. Her entire appearance is unnerving. After this description, we're killed by the yellow rabbit. At first, I thought this was the yellow doll from Fazbear Frights in the FNAF movie, but after thinking for a bit, I realized this is meant to be Eleanor, the main antagonist of the Fazbear Frights Stitch Ray stingers. Not only does she trick Oswald, resulting in his death, with tricking people being a thing she does a lot in the stingers, but the description matches perfectly. And right off the bat, this doll thing being Eleanor is important, because one of the biggest theories around the yellow rabbit's identity was that it was quite literally Eleanor. In this ending, where we try to save the doll but turn around to see the yellow rabbit behind us, they're both in the same room, which means that theory is debunked. I won't go in depth on what this means for the stingers, but it's a fairly important reveal that sort of confirms a previous theory I had about the yellow rabbit. There's other tidbits of lore that can be found in this book, but to be honest, it doesn't really help us actually solve anything, like, at all. There's not a single thing in this book that I actually appreciate and find useful lore-wise. Everything here is glaring contradiction after glaring contradiction, and that's frustrating. Which brings me to the next and most important segment of this video: canonicity of Return to the Pit. I started off the video by saying this book isn't canon to the games, aka the main FNAF timeline, and I even threw in some loose evidence as I covered the lore side of the book. But am I right? How can this singular book be non-canon if both the other interactive novel entries are in the games? Well, it all comes down to how different this book is to the other two Choose Your Own Adventures, and the series in general. The Week Before and VIP are very clear in the message they're trying to tell. Each one is an original story in the FNAF universe that aims to explain certain parts of the timeline. Return to the Pit is different because the synopsis of the book tells us it's a retelling of the Into the Pit story. This novella isn't trying to replace Into the Pit, it's simply showing us a different side of a story we've already seen tons of times, showing us another what if from Oswald's story. I do believe Oswald is looping the same events over and over again while he's trapped in the ball pit, so Return to the Pit is just another twisted loop of what Oswald's seen before. As the loops go on, the events get more and more ridiculous, starting with the Fright story, then going to the game, and now Return to the Pit. Even if Return to the Pit is somehow in the games, despite the many contradictions I talked about earlier, it's still irrelevant to the story because it's a repeat of something Oswald has already experienced. I've heard people say that since the other two interactive novels are in the game's timeline, saying this one isn't is wrong. I may have clickbaited you a little bit, because while Return to the Pit is probably tied to the main timeline, it's just another part of the Into the Pit loop like we just discussed. Which brings us to another important subject I want to talk about. Why Return to the Pit was written the way it was. I think there's a reason why Scott Cawthon made Return to the Pit so weird. In fact, I think every single strange thing that we can find in this book is entirely planned out by him to give us one important clue. A clue about the canonicity of the Into the Pit game from last year. Over the last few months, it seems Scott and company are trying to tell us the Fazbear fights and tales from the Pizzaplex books are in the game's timeline. But a big point of confusion for a lot of people was the Into the Pit game. While some people, myself included, assumed it was in the game's timeline since it's, a game, a surprising amount of people immediately said it wasn't. Obviously, this ties back to the hatred some fans have for the books, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. Because I think Return to the Pit's existence single-handedly proves the Into the Pit game is canon to the main continuity. Think about it. We got Into the Pit in Frights, which is most likely canon to the games, then we got the Into the Pit video game, which should also be in the main timeline, and now we got the Return to the Pit interactive novel, which comes from a series seemingly confirmed to be in the games. But if each one of these is in the games, and they happen at the same time to the same person, that must be impossible, right? So there's gotta be one of these that is the true version of the Into the Pit story. Which one is it? Let's find out. First off, I think it's definitely not the original Into the Pit novella, as that one seems to have been phased out by the newer versions. After all, there has to be a reason Scott is telling us the same story over and over again. Also, it's not essential to Fazbear fight Stitch Drive Stingers, as Oswald isn't brought up a single time in those stories. The Into the Pit game is the strongest contender for me. It's a game, which means it should go in the game's timeline, and it's a new, updated version of Into the Pit, meant to expand on the original idea and tie it to the games. Return to the Pit, as we covered earlier, is a retelling of the Into the Pit novella, but even though it's in a canon book series, it doesn't have to take priority over the other versions. To me, the synopsis telling us it's a retelling and not a new story is the biggest reason why I think the Into the Pit game is the canon entry. The reason Return to the Pit is so weird is because Scott wants us to understand that the game is the true Into the Pit story, and that Return to the Pit is just a retelling at worst, and a part of the Into the Pit loop at best. So, in conclusion, is Return to the Pit canon to the games? Kinda. But no, it doesn't take priority over the Into the Pit game. Thanks for watching my first video of the year. I'll see you in the next one.